I will never forget the day I almost sold my goat for less than a handful of groundnuts. It was a decision that could have changed my life forever, but thankfully, I learned an important lesson in the end. It was the dry season, and the land was parched. Food was running low in the village, and the whole community seemed to be struggling. My family wasn't exempt from the hunger. I had only one goat left, a small one named Obi. Obi wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he was mine, and I loved him like a friend. I remember watching him nibble on dry leaves one afternoon as I sat under the old mango tree, feeling a pang of hunger in my stomach. Obi's stomach was no better. I could see his ribs, each one sharper than the last, as he struggled to find enough food. He would wander around the yard aimlessly, looking for something to eat, but the grass had withered, and there was nothing much left. Just like me, Obi had been going without food for some time. The sun was hot that day, and the dry, cracked earth seemed to stretch forever. I could hear the sound of children laughing and playing by the stream, but their joyful noise felt distant and far away, as if it belonged to another world. My thoughts were heavy with worry. It had been 2 full days since I had eaten a proper meal. My stomach growled loudly, a painful reminder of my hunger. It felt as if the emptiness inside me was growing larger by the minute. That was when he appeared, a man I had never seen before. His clothes were bright, almost too bright for the dry, dusty village. His teeth were even brighter, shining with a smile that seemed to stretch from one ear to the other. He was carrying a large basket, and from the way it swayed, I could tell it was filled with something. The smell hit me first. A warm, rich aroma that made my mouth water. I could tell instantly what it was: roasted groundnuts, fresh and salty. The smell wrapped around me like a cloud, and my stomach gave a loud growl, almost as if it was responding to the temptation. The man walked over to the tree where I sat, still staring at Obi. He stopped in front of me and smiled, showing off his shiny teeth. "Boy, I will trade you all these groundnuts for that goat," he said, holding up the basket for me to see. He gestured toward Obi with a hand that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. I looked at Obi. I looked at the groundnuts. My stomach growled even louder, as if it had a mind of its own. The groundnuts looked so good. So easy. My thoughts raced. Obi is just one goat. I can always get another goat later, I thought. But these groundnuts, they are right here, right now. I can eat today. Hunger had taken control of my mind. I could taste the salty crunch of the groundnuts already. It felt like I could satisfy my hunger in one quick exchange. But something inside me hesitated. Just as I began to reach for the rope tied around Obi's neck, an old woman's voice called out to me. "Kin, come here," she said. Her voice was soft but had a strength to it, like the wind before a heavy rainstorm. I stood up, leaving the man and his tempting basket behind. The groundnuts seemed to call to me, but I followed the old woman, drawn to her like a magnet. She didn't say much at first. She simply pointed toward a tree that stood nearby. It wasn't just any tree. It was the mango tree that grew sweet mangoes every season. I had known it all my life. I had even helped plant it when I was small, alongside my father. The tree had always been a symbol of patience. "You see that tree?" the old woman asked. "When you were small, you planted the seed. And now it gives you fruit every season. But it didn't grow overnight, did it?" I shook my head. I remembered how small the tree had been when we planted it, just a tiny sapling that didn't seem to grow at all for a long time. But my father always said, "Good things take time, Kin. If you rush, you miss out on something better." She turned to me, her eyes full of wisdom. "Neither will your goat. Feed him, let him grow. In time, he will give you milk, and maybe even more goats. One handful of groundnuts won't fill your belly for long." Her words struck me deeply. I stood there, lost in thought. I glanced back at the man, whose smile now seemed less bright than before. The groundnuts no longer looked as tempting. Slowly, I walked back to Obi and untied the rope around his neck. The hunger still gnawed at me, but I knew I had made the right choice. I led Obi home that day, the old woman's words echoing in my mind. I remember the day I had planted that mango tree, how it had seemed like nothing was happening at first. But my father had always taught me that good things take time. That night, I fed Obi the last bit of dry grass I could find. He looked up at me with soft, trusting eyes, and for a moment, I felt proud. I knew in my heart that keeping Obi was the right choice. Days passed, and I kept feeding Obi the little food I could find. A few days later, I saw the same man walking through the village again. This time, his basket was empty. I wondered if he had traded all his goods for something else. I felt a little sorry for whoever had traded with him. One evening, just as the sun was dipping below the hills, Obi trotted up to me and nudged my hand. I smiled and scratched behind his ears, feeling a bond with him that I couldn't quite explain. I imagined the day when he would grow stronger, maybe even have little goats of his own. The thought made me smile even wider. But it wasn't just about hunger or goats. It was about seeing beyond the moment. Sometimes the easy choice is not the best one. Sometimes, waiting and working towards something bigger can give you more than you expect. Months passed, and the rains finally returned. Obi had grown bigger and stronger. His thin frame had filled out, and soon, he was no longer the small goat I had saved from the dry season. Obi had become the biggest goat in the village. People started noticing him. One morning, I woke up to find Obi standing proudly in the yard. He looked like a king, strong and majestic. Every time I saw him, I felt a swell of pride in my chest. It was a feeling I could hardly describe. The same man with the bright clothes returned to the village once again. This time, he carried a large basket filled with new goods, yams, dried fish, and kola nuts. I could smell the rich, earthy scent of the yams from where I stood. When the man saw Obi, his eyes lit up. He smiled that same wide smile, the one that had once made my stomach ache with hunger. "Boy, I see your goat is strong now," he said. "I will trade you all these goods for him." I thought about it for a moment. The offer seemed tempting, but I shook my head firmly. "No, sir. Obi is worth more than this now." The man chuckled but didn't press further. He turned and walked away, leaving me to sit beside Obi, watching him chew on fresh grass. A few weeks later, something surprising happened. Obi gave birth to twin goats. I hadn't even known he was expecting. I was so excited that I couldn't help but laugh and dance around the yard. Now, I had 3 goats to take care of, and I felt like the richest person in the village. The news of Obi's twins spread quickly. Neighbors came by to see the little goats, and everyone smiled. People even started calling me the goat boy. I didn't mind at all. I knew I had made the right choice that day under the mango tree. I thought about how hard it had been to walk away from those groundnuts. I remembered the old woman's words, and they made more sense now. Obi's twins were worth more than one basket of food. Over time, the twins grew into strong goats like their mother. They gave birth to their own kids, and before I knew it, I had 5 goats. Some villagers came to me, asking if they could buy one. I agreed, but only because I knew I still had more goats left. The money I made helped my family buy more food during the next dry season. I even kept some to buy another young goat. Slowly, my small yard became a little farm. I realized that by keeping Obi, I wasn't just keeping a goat. I was planting a seed for the future. I was building something that would help my family, not just for today, but for the years to come. That's when I understood the importance of financial goal setting. It's like planting a seed and waiting for it to grow, rather than grabbing whatever comes easiest. Goals take time, but they pay off more than quick, easy wins. The old woman's words stayed with me, and every time I see Obi and her kids, I'm reminded of the day I almost sold her for groundnuts. It's a story I now tell others in the village, a lesson passed down just like the mango tree's fruit.